They used to laugh in my face when I said I'd served in special operations. They thought I made it up for attention at family dinners. Another desperate cry from the daughter who couldn't measure up to their golden son. But when the medal fell onto the table, that cold, deliberate clink of metal against wood silence became the loudest apology they never spoke. Their mockery died in their throats, replaced by something I'd waited years to see the unmistakable weight of truth crushing their disbelief. My name is Emma Calloway, and I've learned that some betrayals cut deeper when they come wrapped in blood relations and served with potato salad. The Atlantic wind carried salt and laughter across my parents' backyard that Saturday afternoon, the kind of perfect East Coast weather that made their waterfront property look like a magazine spread. Paper lanterns swayed between the oak trees, and relatives I hadn't seen in years clustered around the patio furniture, their voices mixing with the distant cry of seagulls. I stood at the edge of it all, gripping a beer I didn't want, watching my family perform their annual dance of selective memory. "There she is!" My father Frank's voice boomed across the lawn, not with pride, but with that particular tone he reserved for introducing the family disappointment. "Emma's back from her." What was it again? Administrative work. The cousins chuckled. My Aunt Martha pursed her lips in that sympathetic way people do when they think you've failed at life. I'd been home for 3 weeks, and this was how it always went, the careful diminishment, the casual erasure of everything I'd bled for. It was more than administrative work. Dad. My voice came out steady, practiced. I'd learned to control every inflection during interrogation resistance training, though I'd never imagined I'd need those skills at a family barbecue. Ryan, my younger brother, materialized beside our father, his marine dress blues catching the afternoon sun. He'd worn them specifically for this gathering, even though he'd been discharged 2 years ago after 4 unremarkable years at Camp Pendleton. "Come on, Em," he said, that boyish grin spreading across his face like oil on water. "We all know you were basically a glorified secretary. What was your rank again? Something nobody's ever heard of." The laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the kids playing cornhole paused to giggle at Uncle Ryan's joke. My mother, Helen, floated between guests with her pitcher of sangria, pretending not to hear, her silence as damning as their mockery. I felt the familiar burn in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when my helicopter took fire over mountains I'm still not allowed to name. But there, I could shoot back. Here. I was expected to smile and take it. "Sergeant First Class," I said quietly. "Special Operations Aviation Regiment." "Special Operations." Ryan slapped his knee. "Hear that? Dad Emma flew the coffee runs for the real soldiers." Frank's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. Now, Ryan, I'm sure your sister did her best with whatever it was she did. Not everyone can be frontline material." The words hung in the salt air like smoke from a crashed bird. I studied my father's face, the deep lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his hair, the jaw set in perpetual disappointment. He'd been Navy 30 years ago, a supply officer who never left stateside but told stories like he'd personally won the Cold War. In his mind, military service meant his kind of service visible, documented, decorated with ceremonies and newspaper clippings. My classified files and redacted records were just convenient excuses for what he saw as my failure to achieve anything worth acknowledging. "You're right," I said, setting down my untouched beer on the picnic table. The condensation had left a perfect ring on the wood. "Not everyone can be frontline material." I turned toward the house, each step measured and deliberate, the way I'd learned to walk through minefields. Behind me, the laughter resumed, mixing with the crash of waves against the shore. Ryan's voice carried over the rest. "See, she can't even defend herself. Some soldier." Inside the house, I pressed my palms against the cool granite of the kitchen counter and breathed. 1 breath, 2. The technique that had kept me functional after watching my crew chief burn alive in a wreck I couldn't prevent. The silence here was different from the enforced quiet of classified operations. This was the suffocating absence of truth. the void where my service should have been acknowledged. Through the window, I watched my family continue their party. My father had his arm around Ryan, gesturing broadly as he told another one of his supply depot stories, probably the one about the time he requisitioned boots during a shortage. My mother refilled glasses, her smile never wavering. They were so confident in their version of me, the daughter who'd washed out, who'd done nothing worth mentioning, who'd come home with no stories because she had no stories worth telling. A promise formed in my throat like a blood oath. Next time, I wouldn't stay silent. Next time, I'd let the truth fall like ordnance on their perfect little world. The ocean roared its approval, and somewhere in that sound, I could almost hear the phantom beat of rotor blades. The stairs creaked under my feet, each sound a small betrayal announcing my retreat to the sanctuary of my childhood room. Nothing had changed: the same nautical blue walls, the same twin bed with its lighthouse-patterned quilt, the same desk where I'd done homework while dreaming of flight. But the photographs on the walls told a different story than the one I remembered living. There was Ryan in his dress blues at Paris Island, centered and framed in gold. Dad in his navy whites, young and proud, taking up half the wall above my dresser. Mom's college graduation, her parents' wedding, a dozen family gatherings where I stood at the edges, half-cropped or blurred, as if I was already disappearing even then. In the one photo where I appeared clearly, my high school graduation, someone had placed a potted plant that obscured half my face. I sat on the bed and let the memories flood back, each one classified, each one burning to be told. Kandahar, 3:30 a.m. local time. The mission briefing that wasn't supposed to exist. 12 Delta operators needed extraction from a position that had been compromised, surrounded by insurgents who knew exactly where they were. The other pilots called it a suicide run. Command called it necessary. I called it Tuesday. The Hindu Kush Mountains at night looked like the surface of an alien moon through night vision, all sharp edges and hostile shadows. Flying nap of the earth in a modified MH-60 Black Hawk, so low the skids kissed rock faces, instruments screaming warnings I had to ignore. When we found them, half were already wounded. The landing zone was hot tracers lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. RPGs whistled past close enough to feel their heat through the airframe. Ghost Hawk 1. Recommend abort, my co-pilot had said, his voice tight with fear that 20 years of training couldn't quite suppress. Negative, I'd replied, dropping us into the kill zone anyway. We don't leave people behind. 47 minutes of hell, my door gunners laying down suppressing fire while the medic dragged wounded operators aboard, the weight of blood on the deck making the bird sluggish, a rocket-propelled grenade that missed by inches, its wake shaking us like a toy in a giant's hand. And through it all, my hands steady on the controls, my voice calm on the radio, because that's what they needed me to be. We saved all 12. The official record says they were rescued by Allied forces. My name appears nowhere in the report. The medal ceremony happened in a room with no windows, attended by people whose names I never learned. Valor in the face of silence, the citation read, though even that was classified. I pulled the wooden box from my duffel bag, running my fingers over its smooth surface. Inside, the distinguished flying cross with Valor device caught what little light filtered through my curtains. Below it, the air medal with V device and 3 oak leaf clusters, one for each time I'd flown into what Command privately called certain death scenarios. Each medal came with a story I couldn't tell, names I couldn't speak, coordinates I couldn't reveal. The silence wasn't just operational security anymore. It had become a prison. Every nightmare I couldn't explain to the VA therapist. Every funeral I attended in civilian clothes because officially, I hadn't known the deceased. Every time someone thanked Ryan for his service while looking through me like I was furniture. Outside, the party continued. Through my window, I could see the glow of the fire pit they'd started as evening approached. The sound of laughter drifted up like smoke, punctuated by the clink of beer bottles and the endless rhythm of waves against the shore. I thought about my crew chief, Martinez, who didn't make it home from our last deployment. His widow received a folded flag and a story about a training accident. She'd never know he died covering our extraction, firing his weapon until the flames reached him, buying us the seconds we needed to clear the landing zone. Heroes aren't supposed to die in training accidents, but then we weren't supposed to exist at all. The weight of untold truth sat in my chest like shrapnel, working its way closer to my heart with every breath. Downstairs, I heard Ryan's booming voice telling another story about his time in supply at Pendleton, probably about the time he got commended for reorganizing a warehouse. The cousins laughed. Dad added commentary about real military bearing. I stood at the window, watching them perform their truth while mine remained locked in a wooden box. The ocean stretched endless and dark beyond the celebration, keeping its own secrets beneath the waves. Somewhere out there, in places whose names I'd take to my grave, there were people alive because I'd been willing to fly into hell. But here, in this house, I was just the daughter who'd done administrative work. Tomorrow, I decided, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Tomorrow, Colonel Hensley would arrive for dinner. He'd known me as Ghost Hawk 1 before he'd known me as Emma. Maybe it was time for those two worlds to collide. The truth always finds a way to surface. Sometimes it just needs the right moment to fall onto the table with the unmistakable weight of metal on wood. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon, deceptively normal scents that masked the tension coiled in my spine. I found them in the dining room, Ryan and Frank, their heads bent together over Ryan's phone, admiring photos from some veterans event last month. The local VFW had honored Ryan for his distinguished service in logistics. 4 years of moving boxes had earned him a plaque and a feature in the community newsletter. "Look at this turnout," Frank said, pride thick in his voice. "Standing room only. That's what real service looks like, recognized, celebrated, remembered." Ryan noticed me in the doorway. "Morning. Coffee's in the kitchen. Mom made it strong, though I know you're probably used to that instant stuff from the base cafeteria." I poured myself a cup, noting how my hand didn't shake despite the rage simmering beneath my skin. "We had better coffee in Afghanistan, actually. Turkish contractors. They knew how to make it thick enough to stop bullets." "Afghanistan?" Frank looked up, skepticism etched in every line of his face. "I thought you said you never deployed." "I said I couldn't talk about my deployments. There's a difference." Ryan snorted. "Convenient. Every stolen valor case I've ever heard starts with, 'I can't talk about it.'" "Next, you'll tell us you were some sort of secret agent." "Pilot," I corrected quietly. "Special operations pilot." The silence lasted 3 seconds before they both burst out laughing. Frank actually slapped the table, making the juice glasses jump. "Pilot Emma, you get motion sick on the ferry to Martha's Vineyard." "That was before flight school." "What flight school?" Ryan demanded. "Where's your wings? Where's your certificates? You can't just claim—" "Ryan." Mom's voice cut through from the kitchen, artificially bright. "Don't antagonize your sister. She's sensitive about her service. Whatever it was. Sensitive. Like my service was a bruise to be careful around, not a source of pride to be celebrated." I watched Ryan pull up more photos, angling the screen so I could see him shaking hands with local politicians, accepting his logistics commendation, wearing his dress blues to every possible occasion like a costume he couldn't bear to take off. "You know what real warriors understand," Frank said, not looking at me but clearly speaking for my benefit. "Honor is public. Service is visible. If you can't show it, share it, prove it, then what's the point? What good is claiming something if no one can verify it?" I thought about the villages we'd evacuated under fire, the intelligence assets we'd extracted from certain death, the medics we'd inserted into hot zones despite every tactical manual saying it was impossible, all of it hidden in black ink redactions and need-to-know classifications. "Some of us didn't serve for the recognition," I said. "No." Ryan agreed with mock sympathy. "Some of you served coffee." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Mom hurried to answer it, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a countdown. I heard the voice before I saw him, gravelly, commanding, unmistakable. "Helen, you look wonderful." "Frank still treating you right?" Colonel David Hensley stepped into the dining room like he was entering a briefing room, assessing everything in one sweep. His hair had gone completely silver since I'd last seen him, but his bearing remained knife-sharp. He wore civilian clothes, khakis, and a polo, but might as well have been in full dress uniform for the authority he radiated. His eyes found mine immediately. The recognition was instant, electric. I saw the moment he cataloged everything: my rigid posture, the controlled breathing, the way I held my coffee cup like it might become a weapon. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself. "Emma," he said, and in that one word was acknowledgement of everything my family refused to see. "It's been too long." "Colonel," I replied, and watched Ryan's face shift to confusion. "You know each other." Frank stood, extending his hand to Hensley. "Dave, this is my daughter Emma. She did some administrative work for the Army." Hensley shook Frank's hand but kept his eyes on me. Something passed across his face. Disappointment, anger. He looked at the photos spread on the table, Ryan's commendation ceremony, the careful shrine to acceptable military service. "Administrative work," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting something bitter. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "That's what we've always called it," I said carefully. "Isn't it, sir?" He studied me for a long moment, then turned to Frank with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be very proud of both your children's service." "Well, Ryan here." Frank launched into his prepared speech about his son's accomplishments, the warehouse efficiency improvements, the letter of commendation from a brigadier general who'd never seen combat. Hensley listened politely, nodding at the right moments, but I saw his jaw tighten when Frank added, "Of course, not everyone can be frontline material. Emma did her best with what she was capable of." "Capable," Hensley repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Frank, do you know what your daughter's call sign was?" The room went still. Ryan looked between us, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Call sign." Frank laughed nervously. "Come on, Dave. Secretaries don't have call signs." Hensley's smile was sharp as a blade. "No," he agreed. "They don't." The moment stretched taut, ready to snap. I met Hensley's eyes and gave the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet. Not like this." He nodded almost imperceptibly, but I saw the promise in his expression soon. Dinner arrived with thunderclouds gathering over the Atlantic, the air thick with approaching storm and unspoken tensions. Mom had pulled out the good china, the stuff reserved for people she wanted to impress, arranging everything with mathematical precision while pretending not to notice how Hensley kept glancing at me like I was a ghost from battles nobody else remembered. The wine flowed freely, a Cabernet that Frank bragged cost more than most people's car payments. Ryan was 3 glasses in, his face flushed, his voice growing louder with each war story that had never seen war. He'd moved on from his warehouse achievements to the time he'd almost been selected for embassy duty, as if proximity to danger was the same as diving into it. "The thing about real military service," Ryan said, gesturing with his fork, red wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass, "is that it leaves marks, visible ones. Dad has his service pins. I have my dress blues. But Emma," he laughed, the sound ugly and sharp, "Emma has excuses." "Ryan," Mom murmured, but it was weak, perfunctory. "No, Mom. It needs to be said." He turned to me, eyes glassy with alcohol and years of being the favored child. "If Emma really flew combat missions, where's the proof? Where's the squadron photos? The flight logs? Hell, where's a single person who can verify any of it?" "Right here," Hensley said quietly. The table went silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. Frank frowned. "Dave, with all due respect, you don't have to cover for her. We all know Emma struggled to find her place in the service." struggled. Hensley set down his wine glass with deliberate care. Is that what you think happened? Well, Frank shifted uncomfortably. She came back with no rank anyone's heard of, no unit designation she can share, no stories she can tell. What else are we supposed to think? Hensley looked at me, and I saw the war in his eyes, the same war I'd flown through, the one that existed in classified files and black sites, in operations that saved lives but never made headlines. Emma, may I? I nodded, my throat tight. Your daughter, Hensley said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of command, flew the Black Wave extraction. Ryan laughed, harsh and disbelieving. Black Wave. That sounds like something from a video game. 12 operators trapped in a valley. Hensley continued, ignoring him. Surrounded, out of ammunition. 3 other crews had already refused the mission, called it suicide. Emma volunteered. Bullshit. Ryan slurred. If that happened, it would have been in the news. Not everything makes the news. Son. Hensley's tone could have frozen water. The missions that matter most never do. Your sister flew into a hot LZ with RPGs and heavy machine gun fire coming from 3 directions. She held that bird steady while wounded were loaded, even after taking shrapnel to her shoulder. I unconsciously touched the spot where the scar still pulled when it rained. This is ridiculous, Frank said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Emma gets seasick. She's afraid of heights. I was afraid, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since dinner started. Terror is just data. You process it and fly anyway. Ryan slammed his glass down, wine splattering across Mom's white tablecloth like blood. If you're such a hero, where's your medal? Every real combat veteran has medals. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating everyone's faces in stark relief. I could see it all, Ryan's drunk belligerence, Frank's stubborn disbelief, Mom's desperate desire to smooth everything over, and Hensley's barely contained fury at their ignorance. You want to see a medal. My voice came out steady, controlled, the same tone I'd used calling in danger close air support. You really want to see one, Ryan. Yeah, he sneered, swaying slightly in his chair. Show me your participation trophy. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every secret mission, every classified operation, every friend whose death I couldn't even acknowledge publicly. The wooden box was in my room, waiting. I'd carried it down earlier, placed it in the sideboard drawer, knowing this moment would come. Sit down, Emma, Frank commanded. We don't need any more dramatics. No, I said, moving to the sideboard. Ryan's right. If I really served, there should be proof. I pulled out the box, its wood dark with age and handling. The room had gone cemetery quiet except for the rising wind outside. I walked back to the table, standing between Frank and Ryan, and set the box down with deliberate precision. This is what silence looks like, I said, opening the lid. Inside, nested in dark velvet, lay the distinguished flying cross with its V device gleaming in the chandelier light. The metal seemed to pull all the light in the room toward it, the bronze cross with its red, white, and blue ribbon more real than anything else on the table. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then I lifted it out and set it on the table. The metal meeting wood with a sound like a judge's gavel final, undeniable, absolute. The silence that followed was deafening. That's... Ryan's voice cracked. That can't be real. The citation, Hensley said coldly, reads, for extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight. It's one of only a handful awarded to female pilots in the last decade. Your sister saved 12 lives that officially don't exist, in a place we're not supposed to have been, during an operation that never happened. Lightning flashed again, closer now, and in that brilliant moment, I saw my father's face collapse like a building demolition controlled, precise, and irreversible. The metal lay on the table like an accusation. its bronze surface catching every flicker of light from the chandelier above. The thunder outside seemed to pause, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. I watched their faces, my family, who'd made a sport of dismissing me as they stared at the undeniable proof of everything they'd mocked. Ryan reached out a trembling hand, then pulled it back as if the metal might burn him. His wine glass sat forgotten, its contents blood-dark against Mom's ruined tablecloth. This has to be fake. You can buy these online. Touch it, I said, my voice steady as a flight path. Feel the weight. Real valor has weight to it. He didn't move. Frank was the one who reached forward, his fingers hovering over the metal before finally making contact. I watched his face change as he lifted it, the surprising heft of it, the way the ribbon felt authentic, the small imperfections that mass-produced fakes never had. His thumb traced the engraved back where my name and service number were etched in government-precise lettering. The serial number, Hensley said, pulling out his phone, can be verified through the National Personnel Records Center, though you'd need significant clearance to see the full citation. Mom stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. I need to... the dessert. She fled to the kitchen, her heels clicking rapid staccato like automatic fire. Ghost Hawk 1, Hensley continued, his voice filling the space Mom left behind. That was her call sign. You know why they called her that. Frank, because she could fly that bird so quiet and low. The enemy never heard her coming until it was too late. Like a ghost, like death itself dropping from the sky. The lights flickered as lightning struck somewhere nearby. In that strobe light moment, I was back in the cockpit instruments glowing green. Martinez on the gun, tracers painting patterns of potential death all around us. No, Ryan said, but it came out weak, desperate. She can't have... I served 4 years. I know what combat personnel look like. They're different. They're broken, I suggested, scarred, unable to function at family dinners. I pulled my shoulder back, letting them see how I held it, the slight cant that favored the old shrapnel wound. We learned to hide it, to smile, to let you tell your supply depot stories while our friends' names got carved into black walls. Frank set the metal down carefully, precisely, like it might explode. The clink of metal on wood rang out again, that same sound from my imagination made real. You never said anything. I tried. First Thanksgiving back, I started to tell you about a mission. You cut me off. Said nobody wanted war stories at dinner. Said Ryan's service was the kind worth celebrating, visible, honorable, documented. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. I picked up the metal, feeling its familiar weight. You meant that real service could be photographed, shared on Facebook, bragged about at the country club. My service lived in redacted files and briefing rooms you'll never have clearance to enter. Ryan's face had gone from red to white, the wine and blood draining away together. But you let us, for years, you let us make jokes. Every joke was a reminder that you never bothered to ask the right questions, never wondered why I had nightmares, never noticed I can't sit with my back to a door, never asked why I flinch when helicopters pass overhead. Another metal emerged from the box, the air metal with its V device and oak leaf clusters. I set it beside the first, doubling the weight of truth on the table. Then another, and another. Each one a mission that never happened, a life saved in places that didn't exist. A night I flew through hell and brought people home. Jesus Christ, Frank whispered, and it might have been prayer or profanity or both. 12 men, Hensley said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. 12 fathers, husbands, sons who came home because your daughter flew into certain death, and you sat here, at this table, and called her a secretary. The storm broke properly then, rain hammering against the windows like bullets against a fuselage. Mom reappeared in the doorway, mascara streaming down her face, the forgotten dessert trembling in her hands. All those times, she whispered, all those times we laughed. I arranged the metals in a perfect line, each one precisely spaced. The way we'd arranged the crosses at Martinez's funeral, the one I'd attended in civilian clothes because officially, I'd never known him. I didn't want your approval, I said, though that was only partially true. I wanted your respect, but you couldn't give what you couldn't see, and you never tried to look past your own assumptions. Ryan pushed back from the table, stumbling slightly. I need air. Sit down, Hensley commanded, and Ryan dropped back into his chair like a recruit. You wanted proof. There it is. Your sister is the kind of warrior you pretended to be, the kind whose valor was so significant, so classified, that it had to be sealed away from public view. While you were reorganizing warehouses, she was flying into hell. The metals lay between us all bright and damning, carrying the weight of every mission, every sacrifice. Every night I'd come home to this house and listened to them praise Ryan's logistics commendations while dismissing my existence. Frank looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since I'd come home. Emma, don't, I said, gathering the metals back into their box with practiced efficiency. Your apology would just be another performance, another thing you do because it's expected, not because you understand. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime 10 o'clock, 10 bronze notes that sounded like metals falling onto wood, over and over, until the echo filled every corner of the house with the weight of unacknowledged truth. Frank stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, the crash lost in a roll of thunder that shook the windows. His face had gone from white to red, the transformation of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. You did this on purpose, he said, his finger jabbing at me like a weapon. You deliberately made me look like a fool in front of David. No, I said, closing the metal box with steady hands. You made yourself look like a fool. I just stopped hiding the evidence. How dare you? How dare I what? Dad, tell the truth. Show proof exist as something more than your disappointment. I stood to face him, and for once, I didn't make myself smaller. You spent years building a narrative where Ryan was the hero and I was the failure. You never once questioned it. Because you never said anything. His voice cracked like lightning. You skulked around here with your secrets and your silence. My silence was legally mandated. Yours was a choice. Ryan laughed, ugly and bitter. This is rich. This is really rich. Big sister finally found a way to win. Win. I turned on him, feeling the storm inside me matching the one outside. You think this is about winning Martinez is dead? Kowalski can't sleep without screaming. Thompson eats through a feeding tube. But sure, Ryan, let's make this about your ego. Don't you dare! Frank started forward, but Hensley stood, and something in his movement made Frank freeze. Sit down, Frank, Hensley said quietly. Before you say something you can't take back. This is my house, and she's your daughter, the one who flew 17 combat missions you'll never have clearance to know about, the one who has a kill count she can't discuss, and survivor's guilt you've never bothered to notice. Mom dropped the dessert. The plate shattered on the hardwood, cream and ceramic spreading like shrapnel patterns. Nobody moved to clean it. You want to know the truth, Dad, I said, my voice steady as rotor blades. You couldn't handle the truth. The real truth. Not the cleaned-up version you get at Veterans Day parades. The truth where people burn alive in crashes you survive. Where you pick which wounded to save because you can't carry them all. Where you come home and can't explain why you wake up screaming because the mission never happened. Stop being so dramatic. Dramatic. I pulled my shirt aside, showing the scar on my shoulder. Shrapnel from an RPG that doesn't exist. 3 inches lower and you'd have a folded flag instead of a daughter you ignore. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Ryan stared at the scar like it might bite him. You know what the worst part is? I continued. It's not that you didn't believe me. It's that you never wanted to. Ryan's version of service fit your narrative safe, documented, suitable for Christmas cards. Mine required you to accept that your daughter did things that would terrify you. that I was stronger than you thought, that maybe, just maybe, I was the one worth bragging about. That's enough, Frank said, but his voice had lost its authority. No, it's not. It's not nearly enough. I picked up the metal box, holding it like a weapon. Do you know what I was doing while Ryan was reorganizing supply closets? I was flying into valleys where Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns were waiting. I was landing in minefields to extract wounded. I was making decisions that meant people lived or died based on how steady I could keep my hands. Stop, Mom whispered from the floor, still kneeling in the destroyed dessert. Please, just stop. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. Because it doesn't match the family portrait you've painted. I looked at each of them in turn. You created a hierarchy where visible service mattered and invisible sacrifice didn't, where Ryan's commendations meant more than my classified missions, where his stories could be told and mine had to be swallowed like glass. Hensley moved toward the door. Emma, I think it's time we— No, Frank said suddenly. She doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to waltz in here after years of saying nothing and destroy everything. Destroy what? I asked. Your illusion, your comfortable lie that your son was the warrior and your daughter was the washout. You're jealous, Ryan slurred, trying to stand and failing. You're jealous because I got the parades and you got nothing. I got to fly, I said simply. I got to save lives. I got to serve in ways that mattered, even if nobody would ever know. What I didn't get was a family who could see past their own assumptions long enough to notice I was drowning in plain sight. Frank's face contorted with rage and something else shame. Maybe, though he'd never admit it. If you hate us so much, why did you come back? Because I thought maybe time had changed things. Maybe you'd grown enough to see me. I shook my head. But you're still the same. Still so invested in your version of the truth that the real truth is just an inconvenience. Get out, Frank said, his voice low and dangerous. Get out of my house. Frank, Mom gasped from the floor. No, it's okay, I said, calm settling over me like altitude. He's right. This isn't my house. It never was. I was just a ghost haunting the edges of your perfect family portrait. I turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Dad, next time you tell your supply depot stories at the club, remember this. Your daughter has a distinguished flying cross. Your son has a warehouse commendation. Think about which one history will remember. The storm raged as I headed for the door. Hensley following. Behind us. The dining room erupted. Frank shouting, Ryan cursing, Mom sobbing. But I didn't turn back. Some bridges burned cleaner than others, and this one had been soaked in aviation fuel for years. All it needed was a spark, and the truth, falling like metal on wood, had provided one hell of an ignition source. The front door slammed behind Hensley, leaving us alone in the storm. I stood on the porch, rain driving sideways, soaking through my clothes in seconds. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Not yet. Behind me. The door opened again. I didn't turn, knowing from the heavy footsteps it was Frank. Emma. His voice had lost all its command authority, reduced to something raw and uncertain. Don't. I kept my eyes on the churning ocean beyond the lawn. Whatever you're about to say, just don't. He came to stand beside me, the rain plastering his gray hair to his skull. For a moment, we stood there, father and daughter, strangers who shared blood and nothing else. I wanted— He started, then stopped. His hands were shaking. I wanted to keep things simple, keep the family reputation clean. Clean, I repeated, tasting the word like copper. Is that what you call erasing me? I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I finally turned to look at him. Every time I started to tell you something real, you shut me down. Every nightmare I had, you told Mom I was being dramatic. Every time I flinched at fireworks, you rolled your eyes. His face crumpled, aging 10 years in 10 seconds. The medals. are real. The missions were real. The people I saved and the ones I couldn't all real. Lightning illuminated us both, and in that harsh light, I saw him clearly not the authoritarian father I'd feared and resented, but a small man who'd built his identity on being the family's military expert, only to discover his daughter had surpassed him in ways he couldn't even comprehend. I just wanted to protect the family name, he said weakly. From what? From having a daughter who flew combat missions, from being associated with actual valor instead of supply runs. I laughed, bitter as the salt spray. You weren't protecting the family name, Dad. You were protecting your ego. He staggered like I'd hit him. Good. Ryan appeared in the doorway, swaying, his face a mess of tears and rain and wine. This is all bullshit. Has to be. Emma playing soldier. Emma the hero. Stop. Frank's voice cracked. Just stop. Ryan. But Dad. She has a distinguished flying cross. Frank's hand went to his chest, touching the spot where his own service ribbons would sit: his National Defense Service Medal, his Good Conduct Medal, the participation trophies of a peacetime supply officer. Do you understand what that means? What she had to do to earn that? Ryan's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. It means, Frank continued, his voice breaking completely, that your sister is everything we pretended you were, everything I pretended I was. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy as the medals themselves. I can't. Frank turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen before: tears mixing with the rain on his weathered face. I can't undo the years, the jokes, the dismissals, the way I let Ryan encouraged Ryan to mock you. No, I agreed. You can't. But I need you to know. He stopped, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I need you to know that the shame I feel right now is worse than anything I felt in 30 years of service, worse than never seeing combat, worse than being passed over for promotion. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I failed you, not as an officer, as a father. Yes, I said simply. You did. He flinched but didn't argue. Ryan made a sound like a wounded animal. Do you know what I told my crew chief before our last mission? I asked. I told him that when we got home, my family would finally understand. That once the classification lifted, once I could tell the truth, you'd see me. I laughed, hollow as a crashed fuselage. He died on that mission, burned alive covering our extraction, and he still believed in family more than you ever believed in me. Frank's knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the porch railing, knuckles white against the wet wood. Emma, please, please what? Forgive you. Pretend this dinner never happened. Go back to being your invisible disappointment while Ryan gets the place of honor at every family gathering. I don't know, he shouted suddenly, the storm swallowing part of his words. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it. I pulled my car keys from my pocket. Some things break too completely to be repaired. You taught me that. Actually, remember, when Ryan broke my model airplane when we were kids, and you told me to stop crying because broken things weren't worth tears, he remembered. I could see it in his face. The difference is, I continued, heading down the porch steps into the rain. I learned to fly real planes, and broken or not, I'm done crashing myself into the ground trying to earn your approval. Where are you going? Mom's voice from the doorway where she'd joined Ryan. Away, like I should have years ago. But we're your family, she said desperately. I stopped at my car, looking back at them, 3 figures huddled in the doorway of a house that had never been home, backlit by warm light I'd never been welcome in. No, I said, loud enough to be heard over the rain and thunder. Family sees you. Family believes you. Family doesn't need metal falling on wood to recognize your worth. Frank made one last attempt. Emma, Silence was your weapon for years. I cut him off. Now it's mine. Live with it. I got in the car, not looking back as I drove away. In the rearview mirror, lightning illuminated them one more time. Frank on his knees on the porch, Ryan holding the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright, Mom with her hands over her mouth. The medals were still on their dining room table. I realized, good. Let them sit there like headstones, marking the death of their comfortable lies. Let Frank stare at them every morning and remember what he'd refused to see. Let them carry the weight I'd carried alone for so long. The storm followed me down the coast road, but I didn't mind. I'd flown through worse, and for the first time in years, I was flying away from something that deserved to be left behind. The morning came gray and quiet, the storm having blown itself out somewhere over the Atlantic. I stood in my apartment 3 hours north, watching the sun struggle through the clouds, painting everything in shades of silver and ash. My phone had been silent since I'd turned it off during the drive. I wasn't ready for their calls, their texts, their attempts to rewrite history one more time. But I did turn it on long enough to send one message to Hensley. Thank you for trying. His response was immediate. They needed to know, even if they couldn't handle it. By 9:15 Awon, I was packing the last box. The lease had been month to month anyway, always temporary, like everything in my life since coming back. The medals went in first, wrapped in the same cloth they'd traveled in through 3 deployments. They'd served their purpose. The truth had been weaponized and deployed with precision. A knock at my door made me pause. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a FedEx driver with an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Frank's handwriting. Shaky, but legible. I found the medals on the table this morning. They're yours. You earned them. But I understand if you don't want them back. I understand if you don't want anything from us. The house feels different now. Empty in a way that has nothing to do with you being gone. Ryan hasn't spoken since you left. Your mother stares at your photos, the ones she's now pulling out of drawers, putting in proper frames. Too late. I know. Everything is too late. But I wanted you to know I looked up Blackwave. The parts that aren't classified. 12 souls saved. And I was proud of warehouse inventory. I see it now, the silence you carried to protect us from knowing what you'd seen, while we used silence to protect ourselves from knowing who you really were. The medals are in my office. I look at them every morning. They're heavier than I expected. Like truth, I suppose. Like the weight you carried alone. Frank. I crumpled the letter and threw it away. Then I pulled it out, smoothed it flat, and burned it over the kitchen sink. The ashes washed down the drain like the years I'd spent trying to earn their recognition. By noon, everything I owned fit in my truck. By 2 in the afternoon, I was at the regional airport, standing in front of a small charter company advertising flight lessons. The owner, a Vietnam vet named Tommy with eyes that had seen too much, looked at my logbook and whistled low. Military pilot. Something like that. He didn't push. He understood that some service came with silence attached like a permanent shadow. We could use an instructor with your hours, especially someone who knows what it means to fly when it matters. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you want. Got a kid signed up for his first lesson at 0800. 0800. I'd be teaching someone to fly while Frank stared at medals over his morning coffee. The poetry of it wasn't lost on me. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment month to month again, but by choice this time. The phone rang. Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail. Emma, it's Mom. I found your citations. Frank had them in his office. He's been reading them over and over. The parts that aren't redacted. We didn't know. God, Emma. We didn't know. Ryan broke down completely. He kept saying, she was the real one. She was always the real one. Your father hasn't gone to the club. He canceled his Veterans Day speech. He says he hasn't earned the right to speak about service. I know you're gone. I know we pushed you away for years. But I wanted you to know that the medals are still on the table. Frank won't let me move them. He says they need to stay where everyone can see them, where we can't pretend anymore. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't matter now, but I'm so sorry. I deleted the message. 3 months later, Hensley called. Thought you should know. Your father returned his Veterans Association membership. Said he didn't deserve to be in the same organization as people who'd seen real combat. I don't care. I know, but I thought you should hear it anyway. How's Ryan? Quiet, very quiet. Stopped wearing his dress blues to events. Stopped going to events altogether. Actually? Good, I thought but didn't say. Emma, Hensley continued. What you did took courage? No, I corrected. Courage was flying into hostile fire. This was just survival. This was finally choosing myself over their comfort. Now, a year later, I teach people to fly. Young kids with dreams of the Air Force, older folks checking off bucket lists, and sometimes veterans who need to remember what freedom feels like. I don't talk about my service unless asked directly, and even then, only in broad strokes. The details remain classified, locked away with the ghosts of missions that never happened. But sometimes, when a student asks about the small wooden box on my desk, I tell them this. Those are medals from a different life. They're heavier than they look, like truth, like the weight of being seen for who you really are, not who people need you to be. The family house by the ocean still stands. Frank still has the medals displayed in his office. I'm told. They sit there like a monument to willful blindness, to the years they spent looking through me instead of at me. Ryan sends emails I don't read. Mom leaves voicemails I delete. Because here's what I learned at 30,000 feet with engines failing and no good options. Sometimes the only way to survive is to let go. Let go of the controls. Let go of the weight. Let go of the people who would rather see you crash than admit you could fly. The silence that once protected them now punishes them. Every Thanksgiving with an empty chair. Every family photo with a ghost-shaped hole. Every war story Frank can't tell because the only one worth telling isn't his. I kept one thing from that last dinner, not the medals, which I retrieved months later through Hensley, but the memory of that sound, metal on wood, truth landing hard enough to shatter illusions, the clink that ended their comfortable lies. Sometimes, when my students accomplish their first solo flight, I think about that sound, how sometimes the smallest noise can be the loudest declaration, how a medal falling on a table can sound like justice. They wanted me silent. They got their wish. But silence, I learned, can be its own kind of revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts. Your own experiences with family, service, or finding your voice matter. And I'd be honored to hear them.